In this video, I want to go ahead and take a look at how we can arrange images around our text and some of the different options that we'd have in arranging images around our text. So I want to start with a HTML template. So instead of plain text, I'm going to change my template to HTML. And I'll start with my HTML template. And I'm going to title this Floating Images. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. And I have a folder on my desktop already called Floating Images, and our directory structure is all set up, so I'm going to save this as index.html. And to start with, what I want to do is I want to fix my project navigator, because we're going to be dealing with some images and we're going to be dealing with some style sheets. So my project navigator right now, I'm just showing the web pages, but I want to see the whole directory structure, so the whole floating images directory structure. So I'm going to remove the web pages, so remove the project folder, and then I'm going to add a project folder from my desktop called floating images, and that'll have the whole structure. So right now there's no images, there's no style sheets, there is a web page. So that's kind of the starting point. I want to go ahead and just start with a style sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file in the style sheets called master.css. And I want to link to that style sheet. So I'm going to have a link to my style sheet, and I'm going to give it a relative path. So I'm going to move up a directory from my HTML file into the style sheets folder. And then I'm looking for that specific file, master.css. So now the two things are linked, so we're in great shape there. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to grab an image that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Chrome, and I'm going to grab an image. So I'm just going to go ahead and look for a brewer logo. And I'm just doing a Google image search. And I want to grab a logo that's going to be fairly square-ish. If I look at this one, it's 1100 by 1100. Most of them are square-ish if I'm looking at the images. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this 1100 by 1100 image. So I'm going to save that image. And I want to save that into the images directory as brewers. And it's a JPEG image, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. Okay, so that's downloaded. It's part of my project now, so if I go back over to Atom, you'll see this brewers.jpg. And it was 1100 by 1100. What I want to do is I want to render that, and I'm just going to make it fairly small. So if I do, I'm going to go ahead and have an image. The source is going to be up a directory in the images folder, brewers.jpg. And this is going to be my Milwaukee Brewers logo. Okay, so we have this alt text, and I should be able to bring this up in my packages. So I'm going to start my live server. I'm going to go into the web pages and look for that site. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to give this image a height and width. So I'm going to do that in my style sheet. So I'm going to give my image tags some height and width. So the height might be 500 pixels, and the width might be 500 pixels. It's square-ish, right? So now you can see it's a bigger image, 500 by 500. I might go with something a little bit more reasonable, something like 150 by 150. Okay, so this looks a little bit more reasonable to me. And what I want to do is I have that image on the page, but what I want to do is I want to surround that with some text. So I want to use a paragraph to surround that image with text. And I'm going to use dummy text around it. So here's my paragraph tag. And then I want some dummy text around it. So I'm going to go grab some lorem ipsum text. So just some filler text. So again, just doing a Google search. I don't want an image search, so here's my generator. and I can choose how many paragraphs I want. Okay, this isn't really what I'm looking for. I actually just want some dummy text. Okay, so I'm going to grab some dummy text. Here we go. So I'm just copying that, bringing it over to my text editor and putting that into my paragraph tag. And so right now, I copied and pasted that paragraph tag. You can see it's kind of long. What I'm going to do is in the view menu, there's this toggle soft wrap, which means I'm not actually going to put a carriage return in, but what it does is it actually wraps the text at the edge of the screen. So I have that soft wrap enabled. And if I go over to my images, we're looking okay there. What happens if I put this image inside the paragraph? Okay, so when I put the image inside the paragraph, you'll notice that the text, the first line of text starts at the very bottom of the image. Even though the image is inside the paragraph, the text is inside of the paragraph. It's not really what I want. Okay, so this is kind of the traditional example of what an image looks like when I have text adjacent to it. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm just going to put a heading above it. So let's maybe use a H3 heading. Traditional image with adjacent text. Just so we're all on the same page. So that's this. What I want to do is I want to duplicate this exact same scenario, but I want it to look different and render different. Okay, and what I mean by that is I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. So I'll have 3 different versions at the end of this, but for this one I'm just going to copy and paste it. We have the exact same thing. We have this, and I didn't mean tradition, I meant traditional image with adjacent text. So now we're going to have a traditional image with adjacent text, but what I want to do is I want to move the image over to the right of the text. I want it over here on the right hand side of the screen. Okay, so the way I can do that is if I take the image, I can style it, and I can say I want that image floated to the right. Okay, so this is the second image. So now we have the adjacent text, but we're going to float it to the right. And you'll notice what it does is it kind of wraps around that image. Okay. What I'm going to suggest is that we never want to use inline styles. And for this class, it's actually going to be a coding standard violation. We don't want to use inline styles. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to set that up so that we're able to float to the right. But we're going to use a style sheet to do that. So over in my style sheet, I'm going to define a class called float right, and the idea here is that I'll have that float attribute and we'll float to the right. And then if I go back over to my HTML, I can say that that image has a class identifier of float right. Okay, so you'll notice no actual change. It's just now we're correctly implementing our HTML and CSS. Okay, so we have a traditional image with adjacent text, but we have a traditional image floated to the right. Okay, and now lastly what I want to do is I want to take that same traditional image, not floated to the right, but floated to the left. Okay, so now we have 3 copies of this. We have the image floated to the right, but what I want to do is I want to change this so that the image is floated to the left with adjacent text. Okay, and just because I changed the text, you'll see that it doesn't change anything in the browser, so it's still floated to the right. What I have to do is I have to change the CSS. So I'm going to change this class to float left, and you'll notice that it doesn't actually float left. It's more like a traditional image where I don't have any styling, and the reason why is because I don't have a class called float left yet in my CSS. So I want to define that float left class. And the idea is that we can float left, and then we'll have our text. Okay, so I'm not doing a great job of illustrating all of this, and what I mean by that is we have some lorem ipsum text, and the lorem ipsum text only covers 6 lines here, and it doesn't scroll all the way down to the bottom of the image. So what I want to do is I want to create more text, same with on the right hand side, so I want to create more text. So I have this lorem ipsum text. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that a couple times. Okay, so I added some additional text, and what you'll notice is that that text wraps around the image, and if I did the same thing when I'm floating to the right, the same thing will happen, is it'll wrap around that image. Okay, so whether I float the image to the left or float the image to the right, the text is going to wrap around that image. Okay, so just a couple of notes on this. We have 3 different images. One's floated left, one's floated right, one's not floated. So we have those style rules. The ones that the float right has the class of float right, the float left has the class of float left, but each of my images, all of my images, have a height and width of 150 pixels. Okay, so what's happening is all 3 images, I have three images, all 3 of them are image tags, so this selector hits all 3 of my image tags and makes them all 150 by 150. This first float right is a class selector, so it's selecting anything that has a class identifier float right and floating it off to the right. And then same with the float left, it's a class selector, so any element that has a class identifier float left, this rule is going to kick in. So for our first image, only the image selector is happening. For the second one, it's the image selector and the class selector affecting that image. And then lastly, the third image is the image selector affecting it, and then the float left class selector affecting it. There's more to floating images and floating things left and right. So for instance, we can float paragraphs to the left, we can float paragraphs to the right, and the reason we do that is we might want to have a multi-column layout. So you'll notice that there's a screencast that was not produced by me. It's out on YouTube that covers floats and clears. Make sure to take a look at that as well. So you get the idea of I want to float something to the left, I want to float something to the right. So in this example, we're talking specifically about images. But I could be doing that to get kind of a multi-column layout, and I didn't want to dig into that too much this week. I really just wanted to introduce the concept of how do we float things around our page to have different looks and feels. Okay.